Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan-Hasson. I'm one of the research analysts at TrustRadius, and I led this year's research end of our B2B Buying Disconnect project. And this is our 5th year doing this report, so we have a lot of great data to share, both historical data that we've been collecting over the past 5 years, and some interesting new topics that we asked tech buyers and tech vendors about this year. So diving right in, one of the key parts of the report was who tech buyers are and what they look like in 2020. And this year, about 60% of our buyer respondents were millennials, and 2% were Gen Z. And we also found that the younger generations of buyers do behave qualitatively differently from older generations of buyers in a few specific ways. And this is one great example. So younger generations of buyers, Gen Z and millennials, are more likely to first discover products by searching for them online. Compared to the older generations that are much more likely to rely on their own prior experience with a product. And then the younger generations of buyers are also less likely to use analyst rankings and reports than the older generations. And those are kind of the two key ways that younger generation of buyers differ from the older generation of buyers. And then relatedly, we've also been tracking the usage of information sources that buyers use over the past few years, and we've seen a steady decline in buyer usage of analyst reports and rankings. Another key focus of the report was figuring out what buyers want and how they want to be reached out to by vendors and what their preferred forms of engagement are. This year, one of the new topics that we asked buyers about was self-service. And we found that a very large percentage of buyers, 87%, do want self-service options. They want to be able to self-serve at least part of their buying journey. And one quick clarification point here, this doesn't necessarily mean that they want to, never talk with a vendor representative and always be able to purchase a product completely on their own, but they want to have the option to use some sort of self-service elements throughout their buying journey. And we also asked vendors what sort of self-service options they their buyers. And the good news is that a majority of vendors do provide at least some sort of self-service options for their buyers. However, about a third of vendors don't provide any form of self-service options for their buyers. Hang on, there we go. Another thing we asked tech buyers about were their pet peeves in terms of interacting with tech vendors. And so these top 5 emerged as the key themes of the things that buyers were the most frustrated by. And we also got a little bit more specific and asked buyers about how likely they were to respond to individual marketing and sales tactics. And so here's a view of some of the tactics that buyers are least likely and most likely to respond to. So over on the left-hand side, we found that buyers are least likely to respond to non-personalized messages, cold calls, chatbots, and AI assistants. And then at the other end of the spectrum, buyers were most likely to respond to digital event invitations and personalized messages. We also drilled down a little bit deeper on a few different key tactics. And chatbots was one where buyers were actually not very likely to respond to them at all. About 70% of buyers said they would not respond to a chatbot, even if the message was relevant. And comparatively, at least 40% of vendors thought that chatbots were either very effective or fairly effective as a marketing tactic. And we also took a closer look at digital event invitations. And here you can see that a much larger percentage of buyers, just over 40%, were either fairly likely or very likely to respond to these marketing tactics. And vendors also saw these as a fairly likely fairly effective or very effective marketing strategy. And then we also asked vendors in their perspective, what have been the most effective marketing tactics. And customer referrals came out as the #1, which was followed by personalized messages, online events, and also investing in SEO. We also asked both tech buyers and vendors about the increase in social media advertisements that both have been kind of seeing and doing online. And we found that buyers and vendors are pretty much aligned in terms of whether or not they've been seeing and also increasing their usage of retargeting ads. When we followed up with vendors and asked them how well do they feel their ads are performing, a large portion of vendors, over 50%, felt like they worked either somewhat well all the way to very well. And when we followed up with buyers and asked them how they felt about these ads, some buyers reacted kind of positively to these ads, but others reacted fairly negatively as well. The different information sources that buyers use has been a topic that we've been tracking for over 5 years now. And here's a view of the different information sources that buyers use this year. It's quite a long list. However, we did focus in on the top 5 information sources that buyers used in this year because they've remained consistent over the past 5 years. So product demos, vendor product and websites, user reviews, vendor representatives, and free trials and accounts are really the key sources that buyers turn to help them make their purchase decisions. And we also went a step further and asked buyers how trustworthy and how influential were these resources in their buying decision. And out of their top 5, you can see in this chart that free trials and accounts, product demos, and user reviews scored the highest in terms of level of trustworthiness and level of influence among buyers. Overall, we did notice that there was a disconnect between the top 5 engagement tactics that vendors use and the top 5 information sources that buyers use. 2 out of the 5 do overlap, so both rely on product demos and the vendor product and website. However, vendors are more likely to rely on marketing collateral, case studies, and customer references than they are on buyers' other top 5 resources. And we also asked tech buyers which information sources they would be the most disappointed to lose if they couldn't have access to them anymore. And here's a view of that. And you'll notice that the top 5 are also aligned with buyers' top 5 information sources. And this year, we also asked buyers about the influence of reviews, especially relating to their buying committee. So for example, we found that 92% of buyers who use reviews do share them with other collaborators. And of that, 45% of buyers who use reviews share them with at least 4 people. And 12% of buyers who use reviews actually share them with more than 10 people, which was very surprising for us. We also asked buyers, what do they care most about when evaluating products on tech review sites? And the number one thing they pointed to was review content. So the qualitative feedback that reviewers volunteer in their reviews. And this was closely followed by reviewers that were relatable to them, for example, from a similar company size or industry, or even having the same job title. We also asked vendors what they thought their buyers cared most about when looking at products on review websites. And you can see here that there is a big disconnect between what vendors think their buyers care most about and what buyers actually care most about. So while buyers care the most about review content, vendors assume that their buyers care the most about their product score on a review website. And we also found that tech vendors use review websites on average for 7 different use cases, with lead generation, social proof on websites, customer references, and competitive intelligence being some of the top use cases. And we also asked tech vendors who came from different size companies which review websites they're more likely to use. And we found that TrustRadius was one of the most popular among enterprise tech vendors. And then websites like Capterra and G2 were a bit more popular among SMB sizes. One of the other new topics that we asked tech vendors about this year was intent data. And we found that 40% of tech vendors do currently work with an intent data provider, 25% are not sure, and 35% do not currently work with an intent data provider. And of those vendors who said that they used intent data, prospecting was one of the most common use cases, but this was closely followed by supporting sales enablement and also targeting high intent accounts. We also, in the report, looked into the impact that the pandemic has had on tech buying in general. And one area that we asked about was working remotely. And we found that a majority of tech buyers are still working remotely full-time. And we also found this was the case with tech vendors too. And in fact, a bit of a higher percentage, 65 compared to 54, say they were working from home all the time. And we also followed that up with asking, when would everyone feel comfortable returning to work full-time? And it's clear that for a majority of both buyers and vendors, they would not feel comfortable returning to office work if they worked in the office to begin with until spring 2021 or later. Another impact that the pandemic has had on B2B tech sales is that sales cycles for a lot of vendors are now longer than they were before the pandemic. About 57% said that their deal cycles are now longer. And when asked which parts of the sales cycle were longer now than they were before the pandemic, lead nurturing, negotiation, and pre-sales engagement were some of the most common responses. Another new topic that we asked both tech buyers and vendors about this year was data security concerns. And it turns out that for a lot of buyers, data security is top of mind when they're making purchasing decisions. We also followed that up by asking buyers, how exactly do concerns about data security and compliance and certification, how do they impact their buying journey? And for almost 3/4 of buyers, that resulted in extra product research. Although notably, some buyers also considered fewer products based on their concerns about data security, and some considered more products. We also followed up with vendors about whether or not they'd been hearing more data security concerns from their buyers, and 45% of vendors said they hadn't been hearing more about this from their buyers, although close to 1/3 of vendors said that they had. We also asked buyers about their tech spending in 2020 and how it was impacted by the pandemic, and also what their forecast for tech spending in 2021 was. So to recap, in 2020, a large amount of buyers did see either a slight decrease or a large decrease in their spending. And then about 1/3 of buyers do predict that spending levels will return to pre-pandemic levels, although some predict that it will increase and about 17% predict that it will decrease. And here are some of the areas that buyers predict they will increase their tech spending in 2021. And the top ones are web and video conferencing, online collaboration and project management, marketing software, and business intelligence software. And here are some of the areas that buyers predict their spending will decrease in 2021. Some of the top ones are other hardware, vertical industry software, for example, the construction industry, and then professional services software. And thanks for listening and for reading through these slides. However, there's a lot more great data in the report, so you can view the full report by clicking the link here. Thanks.